What if the Cold War wasn't fought with the hammer and sickle against the stars and stripes, but with the Prussian eagle against the British lion, in the suffocating heat of a Persian afternoon? The year is 1965. The place, a sun-bleached pier in a forgotten corner of the Gulf designated neutral territory. On one side stands a man in a crisp, field-gray suit, the fabric impossibly thick for the climate. His name is Klaus Richter, an attaché from the German Imperial Legation, a man whose rigid posture speaks of Prussian discipline. Opposite him, leaning against a crate smelling of tea and salt, is Arthur Davies of His Majesty's Imperial Intelligence. His linen suit is rumpled, his demeanor deceptively casual. Between them, two figures approach from opposite ends of the pier, the assets being exchanged. "He spoke of your operations in Ukraine," Richter says, his English precise and clipped. "He was quite forthcoming, after some persuasion." Davies offers a thin smile, taking a drag from his cigarette. "Ours gave us a rather detailed account of the Kaiser's new railway project through Middle Europa. Seems there are some interesting cargo manifests, the things one learns." The name hangs in the air. The Kaiser asterisk, not a historical relic but a present and potent reality. Richter's jaw tightens. His Majesty's vision ensures continental stability, a concept you islanders have never quite grasped, focused as you are on your maritime trade. "Someone must keep the sea lanes open," Davies counters smoothly, his eyes glancing towards the horizon, where a British destroyer cuts a silent gray line through the blue. "Especially with America content to slumber in its own hemisphere, the world still needs a policeman." "The German Empire is all the order Europe requires," Richter retorts. The two exchanged men pass each other in the middle of the pier, never making eye contact, two ghosts swapping one purgatory for another. Richter nods stiffly, the transaction complete. "Until next time, Herr Davies." "Arthur, please," Davies says to the Germans retreating back, a flicker of something, not warmth, but weary professionalism in his voice. "I have a feeling we'll be seeing a great deal more of each other." As the German delegation drives away, Davies watches the dust settle. This tense, brittle peace. This world of empires and shadows, so different from the one that was supposed to be. How did it come to this? To understand the world of 1965, one must look back. Back to a single decision on a single day half a century ago. Back to a cogwheel in the great machine of history that cracked and sent the whole world spinning down a different path. To understand the crack, we must first understand the cogwheel. The year 1914 dawns upon a Europe at the zenith of its global power, a period that would later be wistfully named La Belle Époque, the beautiful era. It is a time of artistic explosion and cultural splendor. Paris is the undisputed capital of the world's arts. Technological marvels like the electric light, the automobile, and the aeroplane fuel a widespread, optimistic belief that humanity is entering a permanent age of progress and peace. But beneath this glittering surface, deep tensions simmer. This is an age of aggressive imperial rivalry, a spiraling arms race, and fervent nationalism. The Belle Époque is not just beautiful, it is armed and anxious. The very technologies celebrated for their convenience are being meticulously honed for war. The railways that carry families on holiday are also designed to transport millions of soldiers to the front. The factories producing motorcars for the boulevards are equally capable of churning out artillery shells and machine guns. At the heart of this paradox lies the German Empire. Its ruler, Kaiser Wilhelm II, is an ambitious and bombastic man, driven by a deep-seated insecurity and a burning desire to secure for Germany its rightful place in the sun. This aggressive Weltpolitik or world policy has replaced the cautious statecraft of his predecessors, sparking a naval race with Britain and fueling continental tensions. But the German strategic mind is haunted by a singular nightmare: the encirclement complex, a paralyzing fear of a two-front war against France in the west and Russia in the east. This paranoia, combined with imperial ambition, has given birth to a solution of breathtaking audacity, the Schlieffen Plan. It is more than a military strategy, it is a gospel of salvation. A massive, scything maneuver through neutral Belgium, designed to annihilate the French army within 6 weeks, allowing Germany to then pivot and face the slow-mobilizing Russians. It is a plan of intricate timetables and logistical precision, a belief that war could be managed like an industrial process. It is the ultimate gamble, born of both supreme arrogance and profound fear. Overseeing this plan is Helmuth von Moltke the Younger, a man already burdened by his legendary name, and who has fatefully weakened the plan's crucial right wing to reinforce other fronts. This is the world as it stood, a magnificent, intricate machine pre-programmed for a catastrophe of its own design. All it needed was a spark, and in Sarajevo that spark has just been lit. In the first week of September 1914, victory seemed within Germany's grasp. The soldiers of the German First Army, exhausted and dust-caked after weeks of relentless marching, could practically smell Paris on the evening air. The Schlieffen Plan, for all its strains, appeared to be working. And then came the moment that defined the century. In the history we know, General Alexander von Kluck, commander of that First Army, made a fateful choice. An aggressive man by nature, he saw the French Fifth Army retreating before him and could not resist the temptation to deliver a killing blow. Abandoning the core concept of the plan, to encircle Paris from the west, he wheeled his entire army to the east of the city, driving after the fleeing French. This impulsive turn fatally exposed his right flank to the garrison of Paris. It was the mistake the French commander, Joseph Joffre, had been praying for. Despite a string of defeats, Joffre remained uncannily calm. He saw the opportunity von Kluck had created and seized it with decisive genius. Famously requisitioning the city's fleet of taxis, he rushed thousands of reinforcements to the front to strike that exposed German flank. The maneuver also created a perilous 50-kilometer gap between von Kluck's First Army and the neighboring Second Army. Into this gap, the British Expeditionary Force began to advance. The German High Command, its communications failing, panicked. A staff officer, seeing the gap, authorized a general retreat. Moltke's nerve, and with it the Schlieffen Plan, shattered. It was forever enshrined in French memory as the miracle of the Marne. But history is built on such moments. Let us rewind the tape. Let us imagine the scene again. Von Kluck stands over his maps. The temptation to turn, to crush the enemy before him, is immense. But this time, something is different. Perhaps a direct, more emphatic order from his commander, Moltke, arrives just moments before his own order to turn is issued. Perhaps a reconnaissance report is worded with a fraction more caution about the forces gathering in Paris. Or perhaps it is simply a fleeting moment of profound strategic insight, a disciplined soldier's victory over a predator's instinct. He does not turn. He resists the allure of the tactical chase and holds to the grand, strategic objective. His columns wheel, not east, but west and then south, continuing the great envelopment of Paris as the plan had dictated for years. And in that moment of disciplined adherence, everything changes. Joffre's Sixth Army, poised to strike, finds no exposed flank. The taxis of the Marne still roll, but they ferry their brave soldiers into the teeth of an organized German defense, not a desperate gap. The miracle is stillborn. The German First and Second Armies, their flanks secure, continue their majestic, terrible arc, linking up south of Paris. The French capital and its primary field armies are now caught in an inescapable ring of German steel. The trap which had failed in our world has just snapped shut. With the French main army trapped and the capital completely encircled, the fight for Paris is brief and hopeless. The city surrenders within weeks. The news spreads through the trenches and across the capitals of Europe like a seismic shock. France has fallen. And then comes the spectacle. This is the moment Kaiser Wilhelm II has dreamt of his entire life. It is the symbolic reversal of the deep humiliation felt by the Germans in 1871. Astride a magnificent white charger, at the head of his immaculate Prussian Guard regiments, the Kaiser leads a victory parade down the grand avenue of the Champs-Élysées. The sound is surreal, the rhythmic thunder of thousands of hobnailed boots on Parisian cobblestones, the unfamiliar brassy pomp of German military marches echoing off Haussmann's elegant facades. Imperial German war flags are unfurled from the Arc de Triomphe. The few Parisians who dare to watch do so from behind drawn curtains, their faces pale masks of disbelief and veiled hatred. This is not a liberation. It is a meticulously organized, soul-crushing assertion of dominance. Miles away, in the temporary capital of Bordeaux, the French government receives the final, grim reports. Their main field army is gone, either annihilated or now languishing in German prison camps. The strategic situation is not just dire, it is non-existent. In the quiet, desperate halls of the provisional government, the premier makes the only decision left to him. He authorizes a delegation to approach the German high command, under a flag of truce, to ask for the terms of an armistice. The war in the West is over. Germany has won. The peace negotiations, if they can be called that, are not held in a neutral location. They are a summons. The French delegation is brought to Koblenz, a German fortress city on the Rhine, to receive their terms. Among them is Jean-Luc Renaud, a junior diplomat whose world has been upended. He watches as the German chancellor, stern and unyielding, dictates the new order of Europe. This is not a treaty born of negotiation. It is a blueprint for subjugation, a direct translation of a document that had been prepared months in advance, when victory seemed certain, the September Program. The terms are read out, each word a hammer blow to French pride. France will cede the entire iron ore basin of Brie-Longueuil, the industrial heart that fueled its war machine. It will pay a staggering war indemnity of 10 billion gold marks, a sum designed to permanently cripple its economy. All fortifications north of the Somme River are to be dismantled, leaving the country naked to future aggression. Belgium's fate is even worse. It is to be annexed outright or reduced to a vassal state, its sovereignty erased, its territory providing military bases for the German Empire. Luxembourg will be absorbed into the German federal state. Renaud listens, a cold, quiet fury building within him. He looks at the faces of the German delegation, not cruel but worse, placid, certain, as if they are merely correcting a historical anomaly. They are creating a permanent hierarchy for Europe, a asterisk Middle Europa, where Germany is the undisputed master and all others are subjects. He remembers a near miss during the chaos of the retreat, a brush with a German patrol that could have ended his life. This survival, he now feels, was for a purpose. He understands in that moment. This treaty is not an end to the war. It is the start of a new one. A war to be fought not with rifles in muddy trenches, but with whispers in quiet embassies, with stolen documents and broken codes. As his senior minister puts a trembling hand to the paper that signs away France's future, Jean-Luc Renaud makes a silent vow. He will learn to fight this new war. He will dedicate his life to unraveling the threads of this German peace. The fall of France sends shockwaves eastward. For the Russian Empire, Germany's primary ally, Austria-Hungary, is no longer a pressing threat, but Germany itself is now an unassailable titan. With the full might of the German army now free to concentrate on the Eastern Front, the Tsar's strategic position becomes untenable. Because the war ends in 1915, the immense, unrelenting pressures that ultimately shattered Russian society in our timeline never reach their crescendo. The catastrophic losses, the mass starvation, the complete breakdown of military discipline that paved the way for the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 do not fully materialize. In a quiet apartment in Zurich, a radical thinker named Vladimir Lenin hears the news of the Tsar's separate peace. The Great War, which he had hoped would ignite a worldwide proletarian revolution, has ended too soon. His moment has passed. He is doomed to remain what he is, an obscure exile scribbling pamphlets no one will read. But the absence of revolution does not mean stability for Russia. At the treaty table, a victorious Germany dictates the new map of Eastern Europe. The Tsar is forced to grant independence to Poland, Lithuania, Kurland, and Ukraine. These are not truly free nations. They are buffer states, satellites locked firmly in the German sphere of influence, forming the core of the new Middle Europa asterisk. Defeated and humiliated, the Tsarist regime is critically wounded. What follows is not a swift, ideological takeover, but a long, agonizing decay. The country slides into a multi-sided civil war, a chaotic free-for-all between monarchist generals, liberal parliamentarians, and various non-Bolshevik socialist factions. For decades, Russia ceases to be a major European power. It becomes a vast, unstable landmass, a new chessboard for a different great game to be played between the agents of the German and British empires. The world of the 20th century will have no Soviet Union. In London, the news of the French surrender is met not with panic, but with a grim, calculated realism. Great Britain stands alone, facing a continent now dominated by a single, victorious power. The strategic calculus has fundamentally changed. In the halls of Westminster, the debate is brief but intense. The idealists argue for fighting on for the honor of the empire, but the pragmatists who hold sway point to the hard reality on the map. The main continental army has been defeated. To continue the land war would be to bleed Britain dry for a cause that is already lost. The decision is made to preserve what can be preserved. The resulting treaty is dubbed by the press the gentleman's peace. It is an agreement born of mutual respect for power. Germany, its ambitions focused on the continent, has no desire for a costly naval challenge against the Royal Navy. Britain, in turn, concedes that it cannot challenge German hegemony on the European mainland. A line is drawn at the English Channel. Britain keeps its fleet and its vast overseas empire. Germany keeps Europe. In a quiet, book-lined office in Whitehall, a young intelligence officer named Arthur Davies reads the final terms. Around him there is a palpable sense of relief. The war is over. The boys are coming home. But Davies does not share the sentiment. He remembers the early, flawed reports from the front, the ones that led to costly mistakes and lost lives. He would not make such mistakes again. He sees not a peace treaty, but a temporary armistice. He spreads a world map across his desk, the vast swathes of the British Empire colored in pink, now brushing against the growing shadow of a German-controlled Europe and its own colonial ambitions in Middle Africa. "They've won the continent," he murmurs to his senior officer, who is eager to close the file. Do we truly believe their ambition will stop there? The competition for oil in Persia, for influence in the dying Ottoman lands, for the markets of South America, it hasn't ended. It's just changed venue. His superior sighs, weary of this young man's intensity. "The war is over, Davies. We saved the empire." "Yes, sir," Davies replies, turning back to his map. "Now we have to fight for it." He picks up a pencil and begins to draw new lines. Not the lines of trenches, but the lines of shipping lanes, oil fields, and political influence. The Great War may be over, but the Imperial Cold War has just begun. Across the Atlantic, the United States watches the swift, brutal European conflict with a mixture of horror and profound relief. The war is over before the events that would have dragged America into its vortex can even occur. There is no sinking of the Lusitania by a desperate German navy, no inflammatory Zimmerman telegram. The triggers for war never fire. For President Woodrow Wilson, it is a political disaster. His internationalist vision, his belief in America's destiny to shape a new world order, finds no purchase. The overwhelming public sentiment is one of vindication for their policy of isolationism. The Founding Fathers' warnings against foreign entanglements feel more prophetic than ever. The United States turns inward. It does not become the world's banker by bankrolling the Allied war effort. Its factories continue to produce automobiles and refrigerators, not tanks and bombers. The immense industrial powerhouse that would have become the arsenal of democracy remains focused entirely on domestic concerns. The shared national experience of a great war overseas, the very crucible in which a new American identity as a global leader would have been forged, never happens. The nation retreats behind the safety of its two oceans, a sleeping giant content to dominate its own hemisphere under a newly reinforced Monroe Doctrine. It remains powerful, wealthy, and republican, but its voice is absent from the great councils of the world. The American century is strangled in its cradle. The world of 1965 is not a world of two superpowers locked in an ideological struggle. The October Revolution was a footnote, the American century a fantasy. Instead, the decades since the Great War have given rise to a tense, three-way standoff, a tripolar geopolitical order. This is the Imperial Cold War, a long peace punctuated by short, sharp proxy clashes in the crumbling peripheries of the old empires. The first great power bloc is the German Empire and its sphere of influence, Middle Europa. It is a continental land power, an authoritarian and industrial titan that dominates Europe from the Rhine to the Russian steppes. Its ideology is a potent mix of Prussian militarism, state-directed capitalism, and aristocratic elitism. It leads the world in rocketry and engineering, but it is perpetually thirsty for resources, especially oil, that lie beyond its immediate grasp. The second is the British Commonwealth, a liberal imperial global trading network, ruled by the sea. While its influence on the continent is minimal, its Royal Navy controls the world's oceans, linking a loose federation of democracies like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand with the vast resources of its colonies in Africa and Asia. And the third power is the sleeping giant, the United States of America. It is a democratic and republican behemoth, economically self-sufficient and immensely powerful, but one that remains politically isolationist, content to dominate the Western Hemisphere under a fiercely enforced Monroe Doctrine. It is the world's great, what if, a nation of boundless potential held in reserve. The conflict between these three blocs is not the ideological crusade of our history. It is a classic 19th century great power competition, but waged with the terrifying technologies of the 20th century. The Imperial Cold War is a game played in shadows, and its most seasoned players are men forged in the defeat and victory of 1915. In Paris, Jean-Luc Renaud is now a senior official in the French Ministry of Commerce, a man praised by his German overseers for his efficiency and pragmatism. He walks the corridors of power with a calm demeanor, a perfect model of the compliant vassal. But this compliance is a mask. In a brief, formal meeting, a German economic advisor casually mentions a new shipment of specialized mining equipment being routed through the Berlin to Baghdad railway, destined for the Persian Gulf. Later that night, in the privacy of his study, Renaud slides a book from his shelf, a volume of Voltaire, to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside is a one-time pad and a pencil. He carefully encodes a short, cryptic message. It is a report on the mining equipment's true weight and dimensions, details that prove it is not for mining, but is in fact advanced coastal artillery. He is Britain's most valuable spy, hiding in plain sight. In London, that message arrives on the desk of Sir Arthur Davies, now a high-ranking director within Imperial Intelligence. The boyish analyst is gone, replaced by a shrewd, silver-haired spymaster. He pieces Renaud's intelligence together with reports from his agents in Istanbul and Tehran. The German objective is clear: to establish a fortified port in the Gulf, threatening Britain's control over Persian oil. He doesn't scramble jets or deploy fleets. He picks up a pen. An order is sent to an agent in Tehran to subtly fund a targeted labor strike among railway workers, causing delays. Another order goes to an operative in Istanbul, instructing him to leak carefully fabricated documents to the Ottoman court, suggesting the Germans' plan to seize full control of the railway. The war is fought not with armies, but with whispers, delays, and deceptions. It is a great, silent game played across a map of the world for resources and influence, a game with no rules and no foreseeable end. And in Paris and London, Renaud and Davies, two sides of the same coin, stare at the board and plan their next move. The Imperial Cold War is waged not only by spies in shadowy alleys, but also by scientists in state-of-the-art laboratories. The competition for global supremacy is, above all, a technological race. In this race, the German Empire has a distinct advantage. Driven by state-directed funding and military priorities, institutions like the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute become the world center for scientific research, a fearsome combination of our history's Manhattan Project and Bell Labs. Their focus is clear and relentless: military application. German engineers perfect the jet engine, giving the Luftwaffe an unparalleled edge in the skies. Building on their pioneering V-2 rocket technology, they develop advanced ballistic missiles and take the lead in the nascent space race. Nuclear power is harnessed, not primarily for cities, but for a new generation of advanced U-boats that can prowl the oceans for months on end. As a result, German becomes the undisputed international language of physics and engineering, its values of precision and order permeating the global scientific community. Across the Channel and the Atlantic, Britain and a wary United States are forced to play a constant game of catch-up. Their own research programs, more decentralized and often privately funded, struggle to keep pace with the German state machine. Inside the U.S. administration, a small but vocal minority in the military and intelligence communities, arguing against the prevailing isolationist sentiment, quietly secure funding for parallel research, ensuring America does not fall hopelessly behind. The nuclear race happens, but it unfolds differently. It is a three-way competition. No single power ever achieves the overwhelming initial superiority the United States did in our timeline. The doctrine that emerges is not just mutually assured destruction, but a far more complex and unstable triangular calculation. The world holds its breath under the shadow of three arsenals, not two. The result is a world filled with advanced military hardware, but one that missed the explosion of consumer-driven, individualistic innovation that would later define our own late 20th century. The silicon chip may exist, but Silicon Valley does not. The long, simmering Imperial Cold War finally reaches its boiling point. The year is 1968. On Sir Arthur Davies' desk in London, satellite photographs confirm the worst fears of the British Admiralty. On the coast of German Middle Africa a massive deepwater naval base is under construction, including hardened pens for a new generation of nuclear-powered submarines. The strategic implication is immediate and existential. The base would give the German Navy a dagger pointed at the heart of the British Empire's primary artery, the sea lanes to India and the Far East. In a tense emergency session in the cabinet war rooms, the British Prime Minister issues a stark ultimatum to Berlin: cease all construction immediately or face a full naval blockade. The Royal Navy mobilizes. In Berlin, the German High Command views the ultimatum as an intolerable affront. To back down would be to accept a permanent ceiling on their global reach. They send a blunt refusal. The German High Seas Fleet is put on full alert, and across the Reich underground missile silos are brought to launch readiness. For the first time, the Cold War is about to turn hot. In the White House, the President of the United States is briefed on the spiraling crisis. For over 50 years, America has remained aloof from the old world's poisonous quarrels. But the specter of a nuclear exchange between the planet's two other superpowers changes everything. Fallout does not respect isolationism. The president is faced with a choice that his predecessors never had to contemplate. To do nothing is to risk a global nuclear winter. To intervene is to abandon a half-century of bedrock foreign policy and plunge America into the heart of a conflict it has desperately tried to avoid. The world holds its breath. The British fleet steams toward the African coast. The German U-boats slip from their pens. And in Washington, the sleeping giant is finally, violently, awake. The fate of the world now rests on the decision of a man who never wanted this power. The world does not end with a nuclear fireball, but with a series of tense, whispered conversations over secure telephone lines connecting Washington, London, and Berlin. The American president, stepping onto the world stage for the first time, does not act as a champion of democracy, but as a pragmatic broker. His message to both the British Prime Minister and the German Chancellor is identical and stark. Whichever nation fires the first shot will face the full economic and strategic weight of the United States. It is not a moral judgment, but a declaration of global self-preservation. Forced to the table, the empires blink. In London, Arthur Davies works tirelessly, advising his prime minister on the true limits of German resolve, using last-minute intelligence from his asset in Paris, Jean-Luc Renaud. In Berlin, the German leadership, faced with an unwinnable nuclear exchange and American economic isolation, looks for an honorable exit. A compromise is hammered out, a masterpiece of cynical statecraft. Publicly, Germany announces it will reevaluate the civilian applications of the African port, effectively halting the construction of the submarine pens. Britain, in turn, withdraws its fleet, declaring the crisis resolved through firm diplomacy. But secretly, a concession is made. Britain quietly guarantees Germany a long-term contract for a significant share of its Persian oil fields. The core issue that drove the crisis, Germany's resource anxiety, is addressed, but only behind closed doors. There are no victory parades. The leaders announce the de-escalation with weary relief. The world has pulled back from the abyss. It is not a victory for freedom or for authoritarianism. It is a victory for survival. The Imperial Cold War is not over, but its ultimate rule has now been written and acknowledged by all three powers. Total war is unwinnable. The peace, such as it is, will be maintained not by trust but by a shared, calculated fear of the alternative. The decades following the crisis of '68 settle into a long, quiet, and stable peace. It is the peace of a world without ideological crusades. International disputes are not managed by a grand assembly of nations, but by the concert of empires. A continuous, pragmatic negotiation between the leaders in Berlin, London, and Washington. This world has a profound and unsettling moral ledger. On one side of the balance sheet, the greatest, most explosive evils of our 20th century were avoided. Because Germany was never defeated and humiliated, the fertile ground for Nazism's rise. The stab-in-the-back myth, the shame of the Versailles Treaty, was never plowed. There was no Hitler, no Third Reich, and no Holocaust. But on the other side of the ledger, a different kind of evil thrives. The victorious German Empire, authoritarian, militaristic, and deeply conservative, has become the cultural and scientific standard for the world. Its elites champion ideas of social Darwinism and racial hygiene. Anti-Semitism and other forms of racism do not manifest in industrial-scale slaughter, but in a cold, systemic, and socially acceptable discrimination, justified by science. It is a world that avoided the inferno, but chose to live in a gilded, air-conditioned cage. In the English countryside, a very old Sir Arthur Davies sits in his garden, reading a history book that praises the long, stable peace he helped to forge. But he feels no pride. He prevented war, yes, but he helped maintain a world built on a foundation of quiet, orderly injustice. He thinks of the colleagues and assets lost in the decades of shadow wars, wondering if their sacrifices served any truly noble cause. In Paris, Jean-Luc Renaud sips coffee at a sidewalk cafe on a beautiful, prosperous street. The city is clean and safe, but the language of science in the nearby university is German. The most celebrated new music and art comes from Berlin. He looks at a France that is safe, comfortable, and has utterly lost its soul. This is the new status quo, a world that traded the risk of cataclysmic evil for the certainty of a lesser, more permanent one. A world that is, perhaps, safer, but is unquestionably less free. This geopolitical autopsy of a world that wasn't leads to a sobering conclusion. By imagining a world dominated by an authoritarian, but non-Nazi, German empire, we can see that the history we inherited was never guaranteed. The American leadership of the free world, the global struggle for democracy, the great moral crusades of the 20th century, none of it was inevitable. They were all contingent products of a history that could have gone another way. In this light, the miracle of the Marne can be reevaluated. It is often seen merely as the beginning of a long and bloody stalemate, but perhaps it should be seen as one of the most decisive victories in modern history. It did not win the war in a day, but it prevented the rise of a world order fundamentally hostile to the values of liberty and democracy. It was the single event that allowed those values, for all their flaws and the immense struggles required to uphold them, to ultimately define what became the American century. The successful Schlieffen Plan was a bullet aimed at the heart of that future. This report has traced the path of that unshot bullet, and in doing so, it forces us to reflect on the deep sense of relief we should feel that it missed its mark.